So getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is another Wednesday, another episode of the Mattriarchy. I am, as per usual, your host, Matt Reese, coming to you from sunny and windy Scottsbluff, Nebraska. And we are here today joined by Twitless, as well as our today's special guests, Kelsey Shannon and Mike Barron, to talk about Nexus and all sorts of other things I'm sure we'll veer into. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Mike, I have met you a few different times, but I don't believe you and I have ever discussed Nexus because the times I've had a chance to see you, I had not gotten into reading the book other than occasional appearances here and there, but nothing I was able to sink my teeth into until fairly recently. So I have all kinds of questions.
Where do we meet?
In Fort Collins. So.
Oh, you're in Fort Collins, man.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you know something. We should get together.
Yeah. I've seen you down there and in Cheyenne a couple times, but yeah, I definitely need to get down there again. But it's been a spell, so.
I've also been able to. We didn't meet in person, Mike, but I had you come through Zoom and speak to my class a little while ago, a couple years, I think, actually, in Florida.
Oh, I remember.
Really appreciated that.
I met Twitless in Florida. I tried to steal a book. He was like, "You got to read this book." I'm like, "Can I have it?" And you're like, "No, that's not what I meant."
You have to read it from afar.
Yeah.
I will, if you really want it, I'll buy you a copy and send it.
No. I can get my own. I'm sure I can find it free online. Don't worry.
Okay.
So I had first approached Mike a couple years ago to come on the show and entirely said, "Yeah, we'll set up a date. It'll be great." And then I didn't get back to you forever. But I guess one of the first questions that I had looking at Nexus specifically is that it's this neat.
Speaking of Nexus, I have the link in if you want to pull it up for the campaign that's currently running, and I believe is concluding. In about
30 days. Are we live?
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yep.
All right.
We are indeed. And we've got and you've got that on. It's crowdfunding across 3 different platforms, right?
Right. If you want to see the total, we're within shouting distance of 50,000. At 50,000, we reach another stretch goal, and then we release another great premium item.
Cool.
Do you remember what that was?
No.
Oh, you're not supposed to tell stretch goals, right? You just say we reached it. Here it is. This is what we're getting.
No, I mean I'm terrible about this, and Chris is going to berate me mercilessly. But for me, the story is always a thing, and that's why I do these books. And people who read my books know, the story is the thing. This is a great story, and they'll read it over and over again, and it'll be unforgettable. And that's something that not every comic book writer can say.
So first of all, I did not notice this before, but that giant, is that a Phillips like screwdriver head?
It kind of looks like it.
No,
yeah,
that's a better view of Gormando.
Okay.
Gormando, the eater of worlds. And the reason Gormando exists,
no pun intended.
This dude asked me several years ago, what's the ultimate Nexus story? And without even thinking, I said Nexus versus Galactus. But we couldn't use Galactus, so I created Gormando. And he's appeared in several stories so far, including Monster Hunt.
Okay.
I remember that. Because I remember him showing up in Monster Hunt. Yeah.
I did a cover for that.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, and that was that's how that was a good way to use him. I mean, he was the real threat there. He was the main issue in Monster Hunt because he was coming to eat the earth, but they managed to thwart him. He plays a different role in Scourge because he's not the ultimate evil. When I conceived Scourge, I thought I have to outdo myself. We've had mass murderers, we've had existential threats, but the new threat is something that precedes time. It precedes the Big Bang, and it's been slumbering for billions of years. Or when it wakes, while it was sleeping, all these civilizations developed, and it can't stand civilization. So it appears at the fringe of the galaxy and consumes whole worlds. And they don't learn about it in the center of the galaxy until much later, because news travels slowly from star to star. The only way to communicate instantly over interstellar distances is with telepathy. And now Kelsey knows what I'm talking about because he's working on another Nexus graphic novel that uses that principle.
So let's back up a little bit onto the background of Nexus, because you've been publishing Nexus in this with throughout different miniseries and ongoing series since '81, right?
True. That's
right?
true.
So the other thing that really struck me in reviewing some of those early issues was the intersection, and it's such an interesting one too, because it really does intersect superhero, like proper superhero books, with like a pretty highfalutin science fiction element. Now, all superheroes have a little bit of sci-fi, right? But like there's like world building and interstellar travel and politics, like galactic politics and all kinds of stuff. What was it that prompted you to put together the pieces that became Nexus?
Well, it was kind of a chain of events. The first thing was I wanted him to be dramatic. And if every time he showed up, somebody died, that was dramatic. And that's not a great revelation. It's the reason why crime and police and firemen and emergency responders and lawyers have dominated popular entertainment for over half a century, for a century, because they deal with matters of life and death, and that's the stuff of drama. But I wanted to make him a sympathetic character, so I made him a reluctant executioner of mass murderers. He dreams of them when he sleeps, and the dreams are terrifying and enervating. When he wakes, he understands that he has to kill the person responsible, or the dreams will recur ever more intensely until they drive him mad. I have a principle of storytelling. I have many, but one of them is a story must take itself seriously for the reader to take it seriously. So I take Nexus very seriously. It's not a jokey universe. There's not a lot of wisecracking going on. There's a lot of humor. But Dude and I sought to create a realistic world, a world you can believe in, even though it's fantastic. But we use real principles when we can, such as interstellar travel, which is based on a book called The Iron Sun, which explains how it might be possible to travel interstellar distances by entering a black hole at a precise angle so that you're sucked into the center and spat out instantly from a white hole that's some light years distant.
So you mentioned Steve Rude in going on about it, and I know you guys are co-creators. What was that process like? Because that's one thing that I've always and I've mentioned on my show before is when you look at Nexus pieces, Steve's art is so dramatic, so poignant, and it's so well, it's just great. So, when you guys were coming up with the idea, was it like you had like a framework and then he shelled it out, or was you round tabling it together, or how did that process work out?
Well, you may not believe this, but for 25 years, I wrote the scripts and I gave them to the dude, and he faithfully followed the script. It's only recently he decided he wanted to write his own stories.
But he was really good at like something that I'm struggling with, and it was brought to my attention that he really has a knack for capitalizing on the gravitas of the moment, showing like a really intense shot of Nexus at in the height of his power and everything like that. And I'm learning that I need to take more advantage of those moments where you can really create like a cool, scenario. Like I'm so story driven, and I try to think of like my impact moments, or like great shots of like the cities and things like that, or real world building kind of stuff. But yeah, he captures that drama, so I'm desperate to kind of follow suit.
You're showing material from the very first black and white issue, which was an oversized issue. And if Scourge does well, and that means we have to reach our next stretch goal, which is 50 grand, and we are within a stone's throw of that, we'll be offering the Origin remaster, and that means Kelsey's going to color it.
Oh,
already coloring it, yeah.
Yeah, he is coloring it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to blow your mind. We're very excited about that.
So, kind of bouncing off of what both Mike and Kelsey, what you just brought up, I wanted to kind of prompt further. Mike, when you scripted, did you? Because I remember seeing this page, and it was just again kind of what Kelsey said. You have on that right-hand side, you have a page that's communicating story, scope, and a lot of symbolism as well. And it's an amazing page. And so what I wanted to ask Mike, when you script, were you scripting the layouts as well? Were you scripting with this in mind?
A little bit. For 25 years, I wrote comics by drawing each page out by hand, completely, everything: characters, buildings, spaceships, dialogue, and captions, in a few directions.
Why he doesn't do that for me, I don't know, but
It's bad for my back, Kelsey. You don't need it, because you took the script and did a magnificent job, not just realizing what I had in mind, but improving on it. And that's just something I learned through experience about how to write a script that captures the same flavor as my hand-drawn comics did back in the day. And one of the tricks to that is to write all the dialogue out beforehand. It's a big mistake to say, well, we need 4 pages of fight scenes here, just do it and hand it back, and I'll write the dialogue according to the pictures. I mean, that's Stan Lee's method, but that's not how I write, because I want to tell a more complete story. And I think it's important to give the artist the dialogue so he knows how to cast the character.
Yeah, I get more out of the dialogue, and Mike's really good at simplifying the description, but painting it in exactly the way that I need to, that forms in my head. Like the most simplest description he gives is like when he goes into the wormhole, he says they enter Ditko space, and like that paints a full picture in my head, and I know exactly what to do. So it's an economy of scripting that works very well at describing exactly what you need to see in grand detail, which is this small description.
I think I can see Ditko space as well. Yeah, that's a good phrasing. That's excellent. Okay, well, I kind of answered two questions I had in one there. The which was how were you scripting it with a mind for some of these layouts, and then also how are you guys working together now to do the same thing, which is interesting.
Honestly, I rarely have. It might be just because I've read a lot of Nexus. I'm coming at this as a fan of the book already. I'm really aware of the flavor of it. I enjoyed being in this world, so it's a little trick to draw it for myself, but I'm in the groove now where I'm like I got kind of the flavor that I want to bring to it, and the scope of it and all that's different than what the dude or anyone else has done, but still within the canon, still within the visual canon of the character, so that it's not just crazy out there different. It's right in line with where it should be, but with my own flavor on there, little sprinkles.
So, I'm sorry, you have some?
Yeah, one teeny quick question. And I think it's for Mike. But so one thing that occurred to me when I first saw Nexus is I was struck by. I'm sure some people have drawn comparisons in some of the look to Cyclops a little bit, but what the character that I thought of was Dr. Solar, Man of the Atom, from Gold Key, and when I looked it up, Dr. Solar, Man of the Atom, and Cyclops came out around this almost the exact same month in 1963.
Oh, crazy!
In a very similar outfit, and there were some theories about them maybe being influenced by, I guess, Captain Meteor from Pep Comics, which later became Archie. And so I was just going to ask Mike, were any of those, was Dr. Solar or Captain Meteor, were any of those influences a part of that very iconic visor, bodysuit look, or what were you channeling for that look?
I didn't have really any antecedents. It was my idea to put the lightning bolt on his chest and give him the ruby visors. And if anything, I was probably influenced by Cyclops of the X-Men, although his visors have a wraparound. And these are just seamless, one piece.
It always kind of reminded me of those glasses that were real big in the 80s, those visor glasses, yeah. It's just kind of like it was in the air at that time.
It's a very great look, and it definitely, I think, synergizes with him being influenced by science fiction and superhero, but it also, I think, that look also fits with the judge aspect of his character, because he is an executioner in a lot of ways, and working for justice, but there is that very heavy side to his character. He's
yeah, I mean, it's kitsch and it's superhero-y, but there's a weight that comes with it. I love drawing him where he looks like kind of, for lack of a better word, silly, in the comic book world, like he's got the thing and the visor but when you give him the right attitude, when you see how he carries himself in these situations, there's that weight that comes along with it, and then it creates this awesome juxtaposition where you're taking something that should be kind of ridiculous and making it real. You're suspending the disbelief where you're like, and then it becomes like even more real somehow. I don't know why, but I love it when they take like a character like this that could be Space Ghost. It's like not like astronauts or whatever. It's definitely comic book and superhero oriented, but there's that meat to it, that makes it, just significant.
Well, Space Ghost was a huge influence on the dude.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah, and didn't he? I saw Space Ghost make a cameo appearance. He was kind of in the back of a ship.
Yeah, he does that. Also, guys from Star Trek and Dude and Me, we're in some of those bands.
Yeah, I remember that. That's funny.
So, Kelsey, one question that I have is, you've got a character that's got, at this point, almost a 40-year publication history that is largely tied to one artist, right? What was it like for you to well, first of all, how did you get in on this project, and then what was it like to approach that when it had such a singular voice attached to it prior?
Well, I first got involved in it with Richard Meyer. I was doing books with him, Jawbreakers, doing covers for him and things like that. And he's also a huge Nexus fan, and he reached out to Mike, I believe, or vice versa. And
it was Richard contacted me.
Yeah. Well, he came to me and was like, "What would you feel about drawing Nexus?" I was like, "Are you joking? Don't mess with me like this, And he's like, "No, really." I was like, "Hell yeah, I would love to do that." And then the weight of it comes like crashing down, where you're like, "Oh my god, this has such a legacy to it." And I had to go and research. I was feeling like a bit of stage fright at first, and then I went back and was just going through all the old comics, just kind of refreshing and living in that world a little bit. And I noticed that, and I'd forgotten this, but there were a great deal of great artists that have worked on that. A lot of my faves, everybody from Neil Vokes to Paul Smith to Jose Garcia Lopez. Gosh, I mean, it's
Mike
a huge
Mignola.
Mike Mignola, Adam Hughes. So that really freed me up to like, okay, I can have my own voice in this. I don't have to make it. Not that I was doing that, but the trying to make it like the dude, but the tendency was there. Like I'm like, oh, maybe I should push it more in that area, you know. So it was a little rough at first, but I got over that quick. You know, I've been doing this long enough. I was like, once you're hit with that deadline, there's no more time to think about it. You got to just do it.
You had Bill Willingham did a story, didn't he?
Yep.
I love Bill Willingham. That's great. Gosh, I don't even remember that. See, there's a lot more than I even realized. But I mean, as far as like Nexus Scourge goes, like one of the things that I really enjoyed about the story of it is that yes, it deals with these massive galactic kind of issues, you know, this existential terror of the end of all things, you know, this massive evil that's ancient evil that's waking up. It's also about a man who feels the weight of all of that on his shoulders, and more than anything, he just wants to be with his family. You know, he just wants to enjoy his time with his family and his life, and he keeps getting pulled away by dignitaries, this functions that, and then massive evil wanting to destroy the universe, and he's just like, all right, you know, let's go get this done. You know, and I really felt like the weight of all that in this book, particularly, you know, and that's always that to me, that gives me something to latch onto for the characters to act with. You know, I love having the characters act in ways that are greater than what you're just seeing. Like, you know, you could just have the character go, grr, you know, and they're doing their thing. But I love it when you have that whole undercurrent of what's going on, and you could feel that, you know, in the characters' actions.
One of the things I also want to talk to you about, Mike, with Nexus, one of the interesting aspects of the character is that when we first meet him, he's sort of an outlaw, right? He's not connected to any kind of formal structure. He's his unbearable, unbelievable, uncoordinable power, and because of that, there are people that are terrified. There are people that are in awe of him, but there's this conflicted relationship to formal government, and as it moves along, that simply becomes a level of acceptance by these formal governments. It's like, well, we can't get away from this guy. Which is fascinating on the one hand, because I mean, obviously he is sort of like a tornado. I mean, he's an active, and for lack of a better term, an act of God. But it's so that is so disjointed from human experience, and yet within the confines of the story, you could easily buy into it. At least I do. I'm like, of course, he's going these dignitary functions, these formal relationships, all that kind of stuff. I have no problem accepting that. But if there was somebody who was like you know, the Punisher, who was just wiping out mob bosses, even if we knew what he was doing, I'd still be a little sketch if he showed up at the governor's mansion for dinner.
Well, what are you doing at the governor's mansion?
If I saw it on the paper.
Nexus is the ultimate outsider. He did not grow up in any kind of civilization. He grew up mostly by himself. His parents were depressed. His mother starved herself to death. His father was about to kill himself when Nexus began dreaming about him. And Nexus prevented his father from killing himself by doing the deed himself. And when he showed up, he represented no government that anybody had heard of. These people that keep coming to Ilum, he collected them because they had no place else to go. And thus this civilization is forged out of nothing with all these disparate elements. And he was there first, so he feels an obligation to take charge and be the titular leader of this society on Ilum. But he's not crazy about it. That's not what he'd like to do. He would rather go to the beach, play golf, be with his family. But these responsibilities are thrust upon him. And because he's a man and he understands what it is to be a man, he accepts that.
So one thing that occurs to me, and when it comes to Nexus Scourge, reading through some of the Nexus that I've had the opportunity to read, I've noticed that at certain points, the story focuses less on Nexus himself, but at certain times focuses on Ilum and focuses on that ersatz world that's created, that has to be created when you have all of these refugees and people who are often victims of the people who Nexus has been sent to, deal with. And all these different cultures from all over the galaxy thrown together, some of whom they're so broken they don't even have all of their body parts. There's a segment of the population. I want to pick your brain a little bit, about that in a second too. But in
the
Nexus,
heads, right?
About the
Yeah.
heads. I definitely have to ask you about the heads.
Yeah.
But in Nexus Scourge, is this story more of a story? Will readers see more of a Nexus focused on Nexus? Is it going to be Nexus and that those interesting dynamics that you have put a lot of time into exploring with Ilum? Is it a mixture of both? Where are you seeing this story really kind of camping out?
Well, you will see Ilum, but it's primarily a journey as Nexus seeks to track down this primordial evil that threatens all life everywhere. And it takes him from Ilum to the center of the galaxy and then to the rim of the galaxy as he gets closer and closer. And of course, the further from civilization he gets and the closer to danger, he has some strange encounters with people you would not meet on Earth.
Or
But
anywhere.
yeah, you're going to see him with his family. You're going to see him with his family. And at the end.
Okay. So that would be, Sundra, right?
Sunda's his wife, Harry's
Right.
his son, Tyrone is the president, Honest Vooper, Ken Vooper, that's his name, is the big entrepreneur on the planet, and Vooper is an archetypal Texan, a little guy with a big hat. You might want to bring up that video and show the video because it explains a lot.
I have it. I brought it up for you so you can see the non-web based one. You can see it. The actual video.
Is that what we have here?
An
Yes.
ancient evil, billions of years old, wages war on the universe. Entire star systems are vanishing without a trace, leaving devastation in their wake. Nexus, the intergalactic guardian of lost souls, must stop the unnameable terror and its expanding scourge of destruction. The totality of everything in existence will collapse upon itself if he fails. With the fate of the cosmos in the balance, Nexus must confront his most dangerous adversary yet. Can he save creation from total and certain destruction, or will darkness reign supreme? Find out in Nexus Scourge, the all-new epic sci-fi adventure from Eisner-winning co-creator Mike Barron, exploding with Kelsey Shannon's dynamic artwork. Available now at baroncomics.com.
Yeah.
Did you animate that last bit there, Kelsey?
Yeah, just that last bit.
Yeah, it looks like- yeah. That's nice.
It's good. Uh-oh.
Whoops. Hit
There
the
we
wrong
go.
button.
Play it again. It's fine.
Yeah, it came out great. Came out good
No, it
trailer.
definitely came out
This
good.
is almost like it's not a road picture, but what do you call it? Like a chase story? You know those kinds of stories where they're on the road, they're traveling, and they're
It's like Apocalypse Now. It's a journey
Yeah.
into darkness.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
from
I
the
don't
chat, Flyfox Pro says, Dang Kelsey, that's some tremendous art. Really doing right by the Nexus
Thank you.
tradition with this one.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, very
Colin
proud.
says, yeah, that's super enticing even to look at. That's what I look for in a comic. So
Look at me, I'm just beaming. I love it.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. No, it definitely-
Now I'm intrigued to prompt further on without obviously getting into any spoiler territory, but I know, Mike, that you have put in quite a bit of philosophical depth into your work, specifically with Nexus. And so I'm curious about what types of darkness, because you were putting in citations from some philosophers that I am not familiar with even. I know that you're familiar. Was it Schopenhauer? I think was showed up.
It may be. You know, a lot of those aphorisms that I put on the first page of Nexus in years gone past are just things I stumbled across in my research, which is a wonderful thing about research is you look something up and you learn something you never knew and it affects the story.
Yeah, Twitless is always looking for that deep in there. How does Tolstoy fit in your repertoire?
Let's one thing that I've noticed and is that I mean we all do this. We're all influenced by our times. And so I know that, reading some of the earlier Nexus material, I could definitely see the specter of, the Cold War was those things had an impact.
That's true. Absolutely right.
So what I would ask is for today, what are some of the things, because, we don't necessarily have the same Cold War atmosphere. We have a new one. So I guess it's just come back in flavor in a way. But what are some of those, what are some of the things that you've recently seen that have been influencing you in that may be influencing Scourge?
Well, Scourge stands alone. I think it stands apart from history and conventional politics. Unlike many of the stories I told back in the day, especially during the first run, where I was borrowing heavily from real events on Earth. But this is not like that. I wanted to reach outside. I wanted to touch the reader's spine with a fear of the unknown and the unknowable, so that sends a chill down his spine. So Scourge stands apart from history. Now, I've always ripped stories from the headlines. Anybody who's read my Punisher knows this, or the old Nexus. Now, when I look to reality for inspiration, it usually has to do with the novels I'm working on. Because I'm working on a couple of novels that have to do with the decline of civilization in which we find ourselves. And I suppose in a way, Scourge is about the decline of civilization, only the power that's causing civilization to decline has nothing to do with humanity and lies outside our ken.
Mike Barron, Punisher. Sorry.
Yep.
Says Anne's coming in. She's doing the garage door. So if I mute it, it's just for a few seconds while the garage door rumbles down.
Okay.
Yeah, I would back that up. That this book seems timeless in that it doesn't draw from like the fears, the current fears. It's more about universal fears that are not relegated to any time point. It's things that it's stuff that we deal with as living creatures. This idea of just some great darkness that wants to destroy you, just out there somewhere, and it's headed towards you. I mean, that gives me the willies.
Sounds very Lovecraftian or
sure.
Yeah. Chambers.
Well, I think in a way you're right, because I'm trying to do what Lovecraft did, which was to evoke a nameless evil. That he never really describes it, but we all know what Cthulhu looks like. It looks like a big ugly octopus head. And I'm trying to get the same effect, although my bad guy is completely different.
Yeah. One of the things I think is also looking at more of the, once again, at kind of the larger scope. The first time that I really dug in to Nexus was the Madman Nexus crossover.
I love that one.
It's great, but it's so totally different, right? From the other things. But one of the things it brings up is that I really applaud. I think you've been able to take and to be involved with Nexus, reaching across. I mean, not being limited to genre boundaries. So you've got whodunits.
Nexus travels well. He'll team up with anybody.
Well, also maybe, but like I mean, you know, there's stories that are kind of westerns. You got stories that are political dramas. You got stories that are whodunits.
Have you seen the first issue of Triplets?
Yeah, that is legitimately has Western stuff in it.
Have you?
No,
Matt?
I have not.
Okay, that'll be in the third Nexus graphic novel that we do that Kelsey is currently working on.
Talk about fitting into everything. That one has like bits of a Western kind of feel at the first part. It has like stuff that kind of makes you think of Metropolis, you know, in the second part. It spans a lot of different things in that one as well. Yeah, there's definitely like every there's not a single page that bored me in any of this. There was always something going on.
So
Always some new locale.
That's what I aim for. I
Yeah.
don't want any boring spots in any part of anything I write these days.
Mm-mm.
So do you think Nexus's flexibility has to do with something about the way the character was built, or in the way that his the conceits of his own framing for his stories, or is it just have to do with the fact that I mean, what do you think of patterns of that? Because I mean, like, there are certain stories you couldn't tell if Batman was in the room, but
I think that given the character that I've created, it depends mostly on my understanding of what constitutes story, and that can encompass a universe of things, an infinite number of things, if you know how to use them correctly, and as long as it is part of the story, a legitimate part. The reader will follow you. And that's what a great writer once told me. He said, if your skill as a writer, if you're skilled enough, you can get the reader to follow you anywhere. It's not what you say, it's the way that you say it.
Yeah, I turned off my camera real fast to grab the, speaking of crossovers, so my camera will behave.
Magnet Nexus, yep.
Yeah. I soft spot in my heart for Valiant, that old school Valiant stuff, and so it's. What was it like?
That one a lot.
what was it like to work with? Because I know the Valiant people are they were big continuity hounds. So what was it like to do a crossover when you were working with something that was that tightly, you know, the character can do this, can't do this, and has to fit in with all of, you know, I'm sure there was a lot of strictures you had to deal with.
No.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
You know, in fact, I can hardly remember any instances of editorial interference when I worked at Marvel or DC or any of these other publishers. The instances of editorial interference I could probably count on the fingers of one hand.
That's back when they largely trusted the people that they hired because they hired them for a reason. They
Right.
Baron.
Well, my editors were people like Archie Goodwin and Denny O'Neil, who were storytellers first. So they understood story. I mean, they weren't hacks. They didn't have a chip on their shoulder. They didn't have an agenda or a narrative they were trying to push.
Story was king.
So I want to prompt you further a little bit on that, Mike, because I know that you have said many times that your job is to entertain.
Yep.
And I know it's a very important thing for you. What would you say? But in addition to that, I know that in Nexus specifically, you and in your other work as well, you have never shied away from referencing or dealing with contemporary themes, political issues. You've dealt with issues of on the southern border. You've dealt with I know in GodCon with Nexus, you tackled religion. You tackled every
One of my faves.
many world religions all interacting. A story I would have touched with.
I can't believe I wrote that.
I know. I bring it up all the time. He hates it. But it makes me laugh. I enjoy that one.
So when it comes to what makes a story, how do you evaluate whether or not a story is prioritizing entertainment or is in fact having that chip on its shoulder? Where are the boundaries for how to do very controversial or interesting issues while at the same time?
Well, I'll point you to a couple of examples. To Kill a Mockingbird
Oh,
and
good
the
one.
grapes of wrath. That's how
is
you do it.
this?
First and foremost, you entertain. And as this writer told me, a good writer can lead the audience anywhere. Now, those stories both have powerful messages, but they're delivered in the framework of vital human drama where you care about the characters. And that comes to my second rule of storytelling, which is show, don't tell. I show, I don't tell. I don't have any bumper stickers or lectures to deliver. I try not to have a message. The message in Private American is very simple, but it's axiomatic. Even a child understands that no organism, neither a single cell nor a nation, can exist without controlling its borders. Any sane person knows that, but I don't have to say that. I show it.
So you from what I'm gathering from what you're saying is it's important to let, as opposed to telling the reader the message you want them to receive, you want them to infer it more.
Show, don't tell.
Well, that's the
Show.
deal with dealing with axioms as well. These are universal truths that all human beings deal with and can relate to. So, you just, like he's saying, show it, just dealing with that, people will know right from wrong, or should.
They should.
As opposed, unless tainted by outside interference, which, I always think about that little voice in your head, that little voice in your heart that's telling you right from wrong. Don't kick the puppy. We all know that's true. Don't kick the puppy. That's bad. Most of us, anyway.
So
Okay, kick the puppy,
okay,
I guess. I don't,
right.
Go ahead, kick it.
So how about them heads? Oh no, we can't take no. That's a sweet puppy.
No, don't kick the puppy.
Freddie, look over here.
Freddie, look at that puppy.
See if I can. I've got.
I just realized I was muted. I was talking.
Oh no!
Got,
That's part of why you got no play with the puppy kicking comment there. I was saying
My wife will make a cameo. It's my lovely
Hey,
hey,
hey, wife.
Wives are the best. Anyway, I definitely would agree with that there's certain universality to morality. So I think we know about kicking puppies, but I did want to take a minute, just a second, to shout out Mrs. H, who left us this Nexus pickle.
Yeah,
We have not seen a pickle in many a day.
Not like that.
Yeah.
So we have to explain. We have to explain a little why Nexus is a pickle.
So Mrs. H, who was a semi-regular viewer of the show, went through a spell about a year ago where every week she was drawing us a themed pickle according to what we were talking about. So we've got a whole folder full of custom pickles.
So it came from, I made a joke. I think a Rick and Morty reference because there was that whole I'm Pickle Rick joke. And so I think I made a reference to Spider Pickle because of Spider-Verse. And so clearly there's going to be a Spider Pickle.
of course.
I think it kind of spun off from there. And so we just had so occasionally we'll have a show and we'll get ourselves a new pickle. We have a pickle verse
To the collection. Yep. So
Nexus pickle. That's a good one.
Yep.
It is.
Excellent looking one.
It's a
Great design. Great.
Yeah, it is. The costume works well in a pickle. Who would have thought?
So tell us, Mike, tell us about these heads. I'm fascinated by the fact that a chunk of the science fiction energy that powers some, whether it's the good guys or the bad guys, it's severed heads in glass bottles who kind of collectively essentially have psychic powers, and they funnel it like batteries. And it's the most crazy and awesome original idea for like giving people superpowers, and I absolutely love it.
Well, thank you. Nexus discovered those on Clausius the slaver's ship because it was Clausius who originally discovered that if you could separate a head from its body and keep it alive, it would develop powerful telepathy and telekinesis powers. So he had a couple thousand of these heads lined up like batteries, and he was using them to gain power over others. And Nexus killed Clausius and freed them all, and they formed Head World, which you saw in the trailer. Because they were free and they had this telekinesis, they were able to clone themselves and create their bodies if they wish. So they heads, if they're only floating around unconnected to a body, they're doing so of their own free will. And they do that because they have much greater power, telepathic and telekinetic power, when they're not attached to a body. But when they're sick of that and they want to go to the beach, they hook up with the body and they go to the beach.
But where did you come up with that idea? Like where
Channeled it from the
just
ether.
came. Oh, that's sometimes the best ideas come that way. So yeah, it's
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
It is a good idea. It's great. And like I said, it's interesting because it doesn't just power, because like many bad guys have kind of tapped into that, but you've also got good guys like Judah, right? Who will also channel that power as well. And so it's just, like I said, it's fascinating. And then those heads, you've given them, characters, their own society, their own, again, I was fascinating to watch over the course of, over the overall story of the universe you're building, because your stories build on each other. So the heads started off being very traumatized, and then later on they're starting to build a society, and then they terraform a planet. And
they play a huge role in Scourge.
Mm-hmm.
All right, awesome.
Yeah, I got to draw the head world for the first time.
And brilliantly. I'd never envisioned it, but Kelsey envisioned it. It's just brilliant. That's it.
It's kind of like, it's more like a head space station, but it's big enough to be a world. So
it's big.
All right, Kelsey, how did you go about envisioning Head World when you were going about designing?
I just thought of a big head.
Well,
I was thinking, what's more appropriate to have for a head world than a big head? It's perfect. And then mouth is like a landing bay. And I made the nose is like glass, and it's filled with like all these decks of city, so you can see, really small. You can see all the buildings in there. Like it's little New York cities on every level of the nose. And then I imagine like the top being like a glass dome where they have a whole atrium and city and stuff inside. Satellite dishes all over the ears. I don't know. Just letting the imagination run wild. What would the Europeans do? How would they?
Oh yeah.
How would Mobius handle this?
Yeah. I can definitely see a Mobius influence all over Nexus.
I can't help it myself. I'm huge fan of Mobius. So Jean Giraud. Is that how you say it? Jean Giraud.
No, it's Giraud.
Giraud, yeah.
Giraud, yeah. That's what he calls himself. So I'm gonna go with. I think he says Mobius. When he says, yeah.
Jean Giraud Mobius.
Never met the man. I have no idea.
I was learning French for a while. And the first thing they told you is to think about that accent and just do that first.
That's a good idea. I met Mobius once.
Oh, really?
Really?
How'd that go?
Jean-Marc Lafissiere
Yeah.
Was his agent. He was our agent, too. I think it was in San Diego.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Boys, I got to bail.
Oh.
I've used up my allotment of words for the day. More words will cost me money. I want to thank you for having me on.
Well, yeah, I had some Badger questions to ask you, so we'll just have to have you on another time.
Badger, yeah, I'd be happy to, Matt. Yeah. I'd be happy to come on to do Badger maybe next week or sometime if you have time.
Well, it probably not next week, but I'll be in touch. Yeah,
okay.
sometime. We'll look
Thanks,
something here soon. So talk to you, Mike.
Good talking to you, Mike.
Yeah, Badger stuff coming down the pipe too.
Oh yeah, that's awesome.
I think so. I think he was showing some not that long ago.
I love Badger.
He's still here. What happened?
I have no idea what happened here.
Well, we'll just keep him on as a
We'll refer to him occasionally.
We'll be the mascot, and eventually somebody in the chat, if they come in late, will be just like, "Why is Mike just standing there like that?" But yeah, no, I love Badger. I think it's great.
Yeah, Badger. I mean, I've been badgering him about Badger for even longer than we were been working on Nexus, and it's always been kind of up in the air or not. I don't really want to. I don't know about going into all that stuff, but
Yeah.
he's such a fan favorite, and so much fun. Oh, there he went.
There he goes.
And he's
Yeah, I definitely want more. Whoa, I'm bigger now.
Yeah, I changed the format so it would be less weird. Anyway, maybe it's more weird. I don't know.
We're gonna be less weird.
It's how I like it.
and Badger is kind of a soft. He's a part of your. He's. It's not unusual for him to make appearances in Nexus.
Yeah,
so you have a
he
natural,
shows up everywhere.
Well, and that's one of the things is that we'll definitely talk about it more directly. But both Nexus and Badger have, well, depending on which incarnation of Badger, which is one of the beauties of Badger. But there's this internal consistency that if it's like world building within the book, and yet when Badger appears in other books, it is complementary to whatever they've got going on, in a way that like a lot of crossovers aren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of superhero crossovers, they come with the baggage of their continuity, and when Mike writes them, he's able to get it in a way where the things that are highlighted are the things that are value adding for both properties, and not like dragging 70 years of continuity across companies.
I hated. I remember hanging out at Gaijin Studios, and Adam Hughes was there, and he was talking about how they're going to work on a new Batman series right after Eduardo Rizzo and Azzarello did their run, which was excellent. I really enjoyed that, but it's still, it kind of hit all the beats of Batman, but in their style. So it was great kind of seeing their take on it. But I heard Adam was doing it. I was all excited. I was like, man, I'd love to see your take on Batman and stuff like that. And he was telling me about it. It's going to have all the villains. And I'm like, so it's just going to be the same kind of thing over and over. It's like you were saying, all these books have to take all the baggage with it, and we got to hit all the benchmarks. We got to talk about his family and why he's on his mission and all this other stuff. And Mike, I don't know, he seems to kind of scooch past all that stuff and just tell a good, compelling story. And it's like, we already know all this stuff, and every comic book is someone's first, but I think Mike does it in a way that it's not hampered by that. You'll get enough of what you need to tell that story with that character in that book without having to re-explain everything. And if you like what he did, you can go back and read all that early stuff. You don't have to. So I appreciate that kind of like, let's just get on with it. Quit miring me down, getting me stuck in the mire of your history.
Yeah. And I'm a big, like, deep continuity guy. Like, I love all that stuff. But it's also one of those things where, depending on the I like that on the macro. I don't necessarily want all that crammed into each iteration.
Oh, I love it too. If you there's a way to do it to where you don't have to reiterate every, like, oh, here's the page of the backstory that explains everything of this. Right. No, you can just allude to it.
Right.
Even simply, real elusively, and people will get it. Like, oh, he's talking about that.
Yeah. One really good mass market iteration of exactly this kind of thing we're talking about. And it's a little silly, but the episode from the second season of the Batman 66 series where the Green Hornet shows up, right? Mm-hmm. And you have one conversation between Dick and Bruce. Oh, these super villains, the Green Hornet and Kato. Meanwhile, across town,
these super villains,
Batman and Green Hornet and Kato saying, now Batman and Robin think we're villains, but we're not. And like, that's all we need.
That's it. That was fine. Yeah, I love that. Because then, that they're now both heroes, or at least not villains.
Right.
And then your mind starts racing. Well, what's going to happen? Were they going to beat each other up? Or no? I don't know. Just give you enough.
So
I like it when you can actually lean on the audience's intelligence a little bit to connect dots.
Mhm.
I love to connect dots when they give me just a little bit. This is what I was talking about earlier with the emotion of the character, and being able to understand what's going on in their head, even if it's not implicit in the writing, that you should be able to like read not only the words, but then you should get like another level of storytelling in the physicality, and that says a lot about, like he could be like, oh, we got to go to a birthday party. And he's just like, birthday party. All right. That says so much that you're not saying out loud.
And that's part of the magic of comics.
Yeah.
That's one of the things we've talked about on the show a lot. Twitless and I have gone back and forth for years about the linguistic properties of art and comics, and just how like that marriage of word and picture do so much to convey depth of emotion, transmission of information, the internal life of characters in a way that film is too fast for and novels can't grasp. So
So speaking of which, how are you going to how do you personally tackle that with a character like Nexus, who is often has his eyes covered and most of his face covered, and so you have certain tools removed from your toolbox in order to convey some of that. So how do you compensate for that when you're?
Well, there's little things you could do, like if you tilt his head down, it makes a furrowing brow with that visor. You tilt it up, it's kind of, you could do little things like that, but a lot of times it's his body language. Like there's a moment in the new one in Triplets that I can think of where he's having to be an authority, and some really crazy stuff is going on, and he's carrying himself with a lot more gravitas, but not in a confident way. There's still a resilient, like a sort of this resoluteness, or I don't know if that's the right word, but
The burden on him?
Burden. There's still a burden there, but he has to present a certain level of authority. So he holds himself in a way. And then this other character is just pleading with him, but there's like, he can't like kowtow to every kind of, request or there's a greater good that he's having to like think about. And that's what I loved about, I'm not being very eloquent here, but it's one of the things I love about Nexus is that it's not just, good guy fighting bad guy. I do love those kind of clear cut good guy, bad guy stories, but he has a way of presenting these moral quandaries in it where, yes, he can go defeat the bad guy, but there's other circumstances at play, that, if I do this could result in this, and it makes you weigh what's happening with the character, what the choices that he's making, in a way that makes it difficult. It's just like any kind of life. So what I was talking about with Scourge is that I really, at the time that I was drawing it, I felt that weight. So I was like imbuing that on me. Not that I'm facing off against existential crisis, the end of the universe, but I understood that the character just wanted to, exist in peace, and he just can't, and I understand that so much more.
Yeah, I was going to say, I get what you're putting down there.
Well, I mean, it's not just current circumstances, just life in general. Honestly, you're always being faced with this situation of like, there's things that you have to do, whether you like it or not, and there's also situations that you can't do anything about. And it weighs on you, it does weigh on you. So I feel that kind of, that angst, that heaviness in this kind of, in Nexus. And that's what I love about it. It's not just drama, but like melodrama. You know, it can be heavy and overt. You know, and not sentimentality, but I don't know. I don't have the words. Where's Mike when you need him? Where?
And that's actually one of the things that in reading back through the early issues that I did today. One of the things I found really compelling about the frame, about the setup of Nexus, in the initial is so you introduce this reporter character, Sandra, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Nexus is inhuman character when you first meet him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's aloof and he's driven and he's what's going to keep somebody like this from becoming obsessed? How do you keep a moral core to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's in building relationships,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he introduced the people in the world that look to Nexus, and in Island that look to Nexus, and the people that and that sets him up in society. Then he also has this female offset balance character whose purpose is looking for truth. So Nexus is driven by justice, even though it's not necessarily within his. He's in some ways a victim to the concept of justice. Then you have his female counterpart who's driven by truth, and what a marvelous way to humanize this character.
Nice counterbalance.
Give him the framework to experience a fully human existence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it maintains his outsiderness. It maintains the burden of duty.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, that burden becomes reward within the context of those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well said. That was a good breakdown, actually.
Well, I've written a few words here and there.
Hey, and Fly Fox, no, not in a million years that I ever think I get to draw a character like Nexus. So it's a total thrill. I mean, I was funny because I interviewed Mike when he first started coming up. I had him on my channel, and I was going through my comics looking for the ones that were from Mike Baron. I realized like nearly half of all my favorite comic books are written by him. All the Punisher, Nexus, of course, a Dead Man,
yep,
freaking Star Wars, Heir to the Empire. I mean, even though he was doing an adaptation of that from Zahn's book, it was still Baron. Even the Hong Kong Kung Fu books, you know, they were the Jade Man comics. I was flipping through there, freaking Mike Baron. Right? Like what? I was like, I dare say he might be one of my favorite writers.
It is always surprising to just read a comic and that you're not expecting Mike Baron to be in, and then he's everywhere.
Yeah.
I had that experience. I was the other day.
Last week it was you pulled up a Turok comic.
A Turok book.
Yeah.
Turok is like one of my favorite like C-level characters, right? Like I don't own every Turok copy or anything. But if I'm flipping through like a dollar bin and there's a Turok comic, it comes home with me, right?
Yeah, right.
And so I just was at a shop and I about a month ago and I picked up some Turok and I'm flipping through, and of the 4 Turok books I got, my favorite one was the Mike Baron story.
Well, it's like this. I mean, on what is it? Graybeard Studio, we're always joking around about Atari Force. And Aaron hates it. He's like, I don't want to draw it. It's Atari games and whatnot. And I'm like, I love it. It's Jose Garcia Lopez I got an
Atari Force. It was much more compelling than I thought it had any right to be.
It was great. It's great. And what's funny is like the first part I think is written by Jerry Conway, Roy Thomas, I guess. But sure enough, like a couple issues in, Mike Baron takes over.
Of course.
Yeah. Guy's ubiquitous, man. He's everywhere. Yeah.
That's amazing. And Mr. T, he did about a third of the Mr. T series from Now Comics back in.
See, there you go.
Yeah,
Mr. T of all things.
Yep, yeah, and they're good. I love those comics. I mean, I love Mr. T.
Funny.
Yeah.
Kelsey, can I ask you a question about your the art style that you're kind of working with right now?
Yeah.
So I noticed that some of your I'd love to hear you speak a little more about kind of the general, not just maybe evolution, but kind of how you settled on your current line work. I noticed that some of your early work, like for Marvel, for example, you had very loose lines.
Yeah.
And with Nexus, it's not that there is no looseness at all. I noticed, but that they do seem a little tighter in some ways. And so kind of like, if you could just walk us through kind of, just how your thinking is with the personality of line that you're settling on with for Nexus Scourge, and why you're settled on that.
It's a constant back and forth where, I started very clean oriented. Like I loved, I loved all that image stuff with all the lines all over it, but I never could do that. And I quickly kind of gravitated towards guys like Steve Rude, guys like Bruce Timm, very clean, very controlled, guys like Stealth Freeze, very design, heavy black placement, things like that. Yeah. So that was my wheelhouse. And then as I'm getting older, I like having a bit of roughness. I like, especially now with all the AI business and the everything is digital. And even though large part of my work is done digitally, I realized that I want to have the artist's hand in it somewhere. I want you to be able to look at the inconsistencies and the rough parts and see the artist's hand in there and not make it perfect. And with like this stuff, it has a very clean quality to it. You can look at it right now, like that shot. But if you zoom in, you can see like more inconsistencies and like lines and stuff like that. But I'm trying to keep this in the same kind of wheelhouse as Nexus has been done, which is high contrast, black and white, illustrative. One of the qualities of the dude as well, which is his he's one of the greatest figure artists that comics has ever known. He knows how to draw the human body perfectly, and that's something that I like. I'm a little fuzzy around that stuff. So and when you're drawing a character in skin tight outfit, especially without a lot of like little extra rendery lines, the lines that you do put down have to be the right ones. So that again has led me into this journey of learning my anatomy. It's a constant learning process, learning more of this stuff. But there's also, it's not just the dude though. It's his inkers like Gary Martin, who inked a lion's share of the Nexus from the Dark Horse stuff. He had a quality of doing it very clean, but then he'll add these dry brush edges on stuff or crayon, and I could never figure out what that was or how he did it. It was like a magic trick somehow, and so I try to put some of that as well. So it's a little love letter to Gary's work as well. I try to have some of that stuff in there, and then that's just all of that's just drawn from influences that I have. I have too many influences, honestly.
That's fascinating, and we need more conversations about. And I'm not even nascent. I'm probably said the wrong term when I was trying to describe the line work that that you were working with. But I'm trying to learn more about not just the storytelling in comics, but what goes into the line work. And of course. There's those, as you just mentioned, there's the layers between the penciled line work and then the inking, and all of that comes together with the coloring to then create these images that we have. And yet there's a lot of deliberate decisions that you're making, and some of which are nods and references that people who read this book many times may never pick up on without hearing from you yourself to kind of say, hey, this is kind of, where that line is being, this is the attempt that I'm trying to make with this line. And I find that stuff to be so fascinating because it
most people probably wouldn't even pick up on that stuff though, but you're, people like you, who are interested in that kind of thing, or you're looking at books and you get used to it, and you might see some of the little subtle visual nods. But I mean, ultimately, I'm more concerned with telling the story in the best possible way. So like I'll add, it's as simple as if it's a scene that has a lot of weight to it, I'll add more shadows and make it heavier or darker, or if it's a more funny scene, you take all the shadows out. I mean, I think it was Mel Brooks who said that comedy doesn't have shadows or something like that. I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing, but if you're going to do comedy, you make it light, turn on all the lights, make it bright. And I don't know. You don't see, and you can't imagine David Fincher directing a comedy, but he does in his own way, dark comedies.
Well, I think there's something to be said for that too, because the difference between horror and comedy is not a thick line.
Yeah.
If you're doing, Monty Python quality stuff, but everything looks like a film noir, it sets real sinister, real fast.
That's actually an interesting. I watched Holy Grail not that long ago, and I was actually very impressed with its grittiness. I was like, this is, and even just the opening scene where they're riding past those groups of people, like I don't even know what they're doing, digging in the ground, and they go into
muck.
Yeah, they go into the whole thing about politics, and and it was just so, it immediately is hilarious. So, and that's not all lights on, I guess. That's real gritty and dark in areas, but I don't know. So maybe I just took all that back.
Well, I mean, part of it with Holy Grail specifically is the part of the joke is the contrast, and that's why they'll go from this like fairly, it's traditionally lit castle scene, like you'd have in a 1950s schlocky King Arthur movie.
But then they do something ridiculous,
and then they do something. Then they have like the narrator who's like a professor, like in this very washed out, a background like a BBC documentary where they, like the lighting crew doesn't know what they're doing, and they're filming in the middle of the day on film. And so everything's just watched out, and so they have that conflict, because that's part of the joke too, is the subversion of expectation.
To be really ironic.
Yeah, and the irony of it. Yeah. But that's also part of it. That does get from something like Get Smart, which is made like completely funny, to something like Blazing Saddles, which is funny because it's sad, right? It's outlandish, but there's this Blazing Saddles has this weaning sadness to it.
Yeah, you're right.
At the same time as it's making fun of the things that we're sad about,
especially like the Gene Wilder character. Yeah, that's such a good movie.
Oh, it's a great movie.
But in regards to Nexus, when you were talking about, there is kind of an anecdote about the style of it that might be interesting to you, but it's largely done in a kitsch sci-fi. I don't know what you'd call that. The 50s kind of retro. Yeah. Even, and it's flying saucers. It's aliens with little antennas, and one of the sort of commandments from Richard Meyer was that he was like, no retro. And I'm like, how do you do this with no retro? Because that's such a part of the style. So I went to Mike and I was like, who brought the retro? And he was like, dude. And I was like, well, how did you see it in the beginning? He was like, straightforward, intense executioner, it just not with that kind of style on top. So again, that freed me up to try something a bit more modern in its design ethic, where, you know, he would have flying saucers with the flume mechanator. You know, no, I want to design it so that it looks plausible on some level, even though it's all fantasy. It's just a spaceship, but you know, I wanted it to be a little more drawn from my youth, you know, where I grew up on stuff like that was designed by Sid Mead, you know, where that's retro in its own way now, but it was sleeker, more high tech. You know, it's a hard thing to describe, but yeah, you know, so like even when there's some scenes where I almost wish I could go back and redo it. Like every time I do a book, I'm like, I've learned so much from doing the book that I wish I can go back and redo the book. You know, like you know, we'll meet some character and he's on an alien world and he's talking to his mom, you know, and I drew it in a environment that was analogous to a suburban world that we might know, with just little differences. But in a way, I guess that's cool. That's actually works in a weird way because it is analogous to that. But you know, your brain starts cooking like, oh, I could have done more with that. I could have had alien environments and, you know, but I don't know. It's probably better the way that it is because of the connection to what's happening. So,
I think that's a good time to bring up a couple of comments from FlyFox Pro in the chat. It says, I think you're a great artist to draw Nexus if it's not rude. I think most people will focus too much on being like the rude dude, whereas I think you've captured the overall aesthetic from what I see.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great way to put it, to capture the aesthetic, the feel of it without being laborious about doing what he did. Because there's only one him, you know.
It's a tightrope walk to because on the one hand, I would imagine you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine you're trying to walk that tightrope between if you go too far into doing your own thing, then it might detract from what you want to do with this property, this established property. But if you try to mimic too hard, if you just try to be a mirror, then it lacks your own voice. And then and because it can't be the exact same thing as that mirror anyway, then you set yourself up for failure in a way.
Well, it's kind of like if I was going to make a Star Wars film, there's a certain feeling that you have to get across in order to make it a Star Wars film. I mean, you can't just go in there and make it a Schwarzenegger flick. It just ain't gonna, you know, it has to. So this is like the same thing in that, yeah, I can go and do my own thing, but as a fan, there's only so far I'd want to go before it starts not being Nexus anymore at that point.
Right.
So, yeah.
Which is a complaint that many comic book fans have had with the mainstream, is that there is that feeling that current creators, and this is an impulse I do understand, that you do want to add your own voice to it. You want to, you know, if you're going to do a Superman story, it can't just be you copying, you know, John Byrne or you know, or anybody, you know, but Dan Jurgens and so on. But on the other hand, we've had creators who have just taken, well, this is what I want Superman to just be, you know, my Tumblr fan fiction. And
that's certainly a lot of that going on too. Yeah.
Right. And so the impulse that I respect is wanting to take a character and add your own voice to it. But it is a balance because just like you said, there's a certain point where it stops being the thing that it was.
Well, the new Star Trek films are kind of a great example of that. Where, I mean, I like, you know, I'm probably going to get tomatoes thrown at me, but I like J.J. Abrams' aesthetic. He's ripping off from the guys that I like, you know, different various directors with the lens flares and the shot choices and the way he moves the camera. It's a little bit Spielberg, a little bit McTiernan. I love that aesthetic. So when it came to like Star Trek, I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. And then I'm like, I'll give it a shot. And then you see it, and it's really weird because, like, on one hand, it's dazzling. It looks like a big motion picture. It looks exciting and thrilling, but I'm not really getting that Star Trek feel, So the same thing with like anything like X-Men. Like I grew up on a very particular kind of X-Men. Freaking, I probably got it right here actually. Yeah. Jim Lee, Will Spartasio, the whole all the guys that went to Image, Claremont, all that stuff. That was like the aesthetic that I wanted, and I got into comics thinking I'm going to get to draw that. It was different. Like a month later, it was already. It changes so fast, and then when Chris Bacalo got in there and Joe Mad, and it just turns into a whole other thing where
this is when cartoony style really started to kind of come in, right? It was,
yeah. But I mean, I didn't mind. I love those guys' style, but it's the feeling of the X-Men that I got when I read those as a young man. That was long gone when I got in the industry. So like, even if I wanted to draw the X-Men, it's so far removed from where it was. And that's not like a comment on what they're doing with it now. It was different literally a year later. It was a whole other ball game. So, I think the Kuberts took over after that. So maybe not a year later, but it eventually evolved into something that I did not recognize. So, that's interesting because we always talk about, or at least I do, about how I hate how comics, and a lot of people have had this comment where they all have the same outfit. They say they wear the same clothes. They never age. Nothing ever changes. But then I start thinking about that. I'm like, there's almost nothing I recognize about the industry, anymore. There's nothing, but I guess you still got Daredevil in his red outfit. He's still blind. He still fights crime using his senses. I mean, that's still essentially the same.
Umberto Eco has a really good essay on the myth of the Superman, where he discusses this very concept. And he, it's not a long read, and you can read it for free online. I'll send you a PDF.
Hey, all right.
But in it, he discusses how the superhero is, in his mind, and he's going off of older Superman comics, he's contemporary with. I think it was during like the 60s or so. And so I think Silver Age, I think, is kind of what he was discussing. But in that essay, he discusses how the superhero in his mind was a merging of the mythological tradition and what he called the novel tradition. And so a character in normal fiction, basically, in realist fiction, you'd have characters who would, even if they age a little bit over the course, even if the story takes place over one day, you're still taking, in his mind, a step towards death, a step towards finality, a step of progress. And he describes how in Superman stories, and by extension, many other superhero stories, exist in a dream state where the story takes place in a sort of never when, where time is always kind of like, time doesn't really progress. And so the characters end up, having this very dreamlike and timeless quality to them, because like myth, they can't take those aging steps. They have to kind of be the bronze pedestal forever. It's really interesting stuff, and it kind of touches a little on kind of what you're talking about. Although, as you mentioned, what's interesting about superhero comics, and this would work against Echo's idea, is the fact that there's an aspect of them that seems to remain timeless, but by golly, every season they're changing something about them.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that. There's definitely a part of me that, like, I love good character drama. I love it when people change throughout the course. They learn something, or they don't. The world changes around them. There's something that happens that evolves. But I also love just a good story of, like, the good guys fighting the bad guys, and that's the adventure of the week. I mean, it's simple. It's it's
Well, and I think part of it is I really believe that since the 1980s, that people in mainstream comics and professional comics and establishment comics have gotten the idea that there is a right way to do comics, generally speaking, right? And I've often bemoaned that I feel like modern writers, since the late 90s have just been trying to do their take on Watchmen. They're trying to accomplish what they did, what they feel Moore did with Watchmen, or with what Miller did with Dark Knight Returns. And it's like, this is going to be my opus, right? Putting their name on stuff. But I mean, a lot of it is, and they felt like there's one way to do comics, but I don't think that that's correct. I think that there are, I love comics. Like, one of my favorites is
pretty
Starman,
infinite. Yeah.
right?
Who?
I love Starman. Like, James Robinson's Starman.
Yeah.
And that was, one opus, beginning, middle, and end. You saw the growth of all these characters moving through time, and it was a localized and a fixed thing, and that's great. But I also love the story where, back in older Batman stories where Batman never changes. It's just the mysteries that are different.
Yeah.
And so every month is a
cozy
whole
mystery.
Every month's a whole nother thing. And Batman, who cares about his issues? He's just a detective. He's just he's just there to solve the case and punch bad guys in the mouth, and that's it.
But then you got
genre is big enough for both kinds of stories.
You got like Bone by Jeff Smith, which by all intents and purposes should be that episodic kind of thing. It should be that it never changes. We're just telling a little different story, like a newspaper strip. But it's a huge epic with mystery and intrigue, and characters grow and change, and so you can not only tell different kinds of stories, but you can tell different kinds of stories with different kinds of characters. It's like, that's who I remember everybody saying that Bone, it's great. I'm like, it looks dumb. It looks like a silly newspaper strip. Then you read it and I'm laughing my ass off, and I'm enjoying, I'm intrigued. And Batman. I mean, I love that. It's almost like you can make little steps, if you're doing like an ongoing, not that that's a huge issue for many people these days, unless you're doing web comics, having like long form storytelling in comics, at least. Because even if you're dealing with 64 to 100 pages, it's still, you got so much time to get across all this information, and you can find yourself with not enough space to really kind of move the needle in that regard. So you gotta pick your battles, I guess. I don't know, what were we talking about?
I think you're bringing it up from like a composition perspective, from the creator side of it. And I was, which is not invalid at all. I was just looking at it more from the reader's point of view. One of the things that problems that I think you have with monthly comics, in light of that, is you can do those very long, stretched out character progressions, and so on the month to month, you might not notice Batman's character changing at all. And you really saw that like in the late 80s, early 90s Batman stories around the death of Jason Todd, and
they started making some dramatic moves back in that.
And Drake becoming Robin, and they had these really macro arcs that were going through the thing up until Nightfall and whatever.
And he gets his back broken. Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. But they were incremental changes, and you could do that because Denny was the guiding force behind all of that, in the frame of that. But one of the things that the problems that I'm seeing in a lot of modern comics is every time a new writer takes on, they want to tell the origin story again. They want to go back to Bruce's parents. They want to, and like, man, those issues have been dealt with already.
Yeah.
for those long-term readers, we already read those stories. We're done with it. Let's go on to the next thing.
That's not what makes them interesting. I mean,
I have a disagreement. Haha.
No,
right. I have a disagreement, and it's taken me a while to think about this one. because I think you're right. And I think there should be a version of Batman for example, your generation that starts in, 60s or 70s and has a continuing continuity and, goes on for, a long time.
Right.
I also think, and this is something, and I know you're not a big fan of it, but let me let me defend Ultimate Spider-Man for a moment. Because
already.
The thing that is important about it is that there was a version of Spider-Man for a different generation, and they were able to see without disrespecting the comics that came before it.
Oh, that's so wrong.
No, but let me finish, right? But what I mean by not disrespecting is they were not united by continuity.
Right. Because it's a different because it's a slightly different continuity.
Because it was established as we're
the others. Yeah.
That's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making is the fact that if you were a millennial, for example, reading a Spider-Man story where the references that because like Peter Parker, when he's making those 1960s references, you get a kid who's raised in the 90s or the 2000s. He's not getting those references that were from the 60s and 70s and so on. And so to have a Spider-Man that it's like, okay, this kid's in high school like me, and he's going through a very he was that generation Spider-Man. I think that's one of the reasons why that Ultimate run was beloved and ran for so long and was really significant. And I like to see that there are versions of characters that, without being that kind of continuity disrespectful, can still exist.
Right.
And the other thing that I think, I'll wrap up my point here, is the fact that every generation has their Robin Hood story. You know what I mean? Like this is the film. This is who Robin was for me. And and people who are a little older, it might be like a particular is Errol Flynn, right? Would be the version like that's Robin Hood. But every generation has this was my Sherlock Holmes. This was my version of Hercules, and that's how those stories are able to live on, and I think that's okay.
I think that to kind of tie it back into Nexus Scourge a little bit, I think that's what Mike was getting at when you were asking him about how he has pulled from the headlines and discussed things that we deal with, and I think that what he's doing is dealing more with the icon. Nexus has like an origin. He has certain powers. He has certain wants and desires, and those things are unchanging. And he's dealing with the iconography of it all. We got a new bad guy that terrorizes, and he's going to go fight it. And so there's an iconography that's developed now that he can just play with and have fun with. And it's like I understand your point. Like, yeah, if I pick up a Spider-Man, I kind of want a Spider-Man comic. I don't want them to break the character every time out of the gate. Go do your special one-off or your another series where you can really push the limits of Peter Parker as a human being, as a really living, breathing character. But I also kind of sometimes just want Superman to be Superman. Like, I just want a classic Superman story. You don't have to give him a weird outfit, or whatever.
Joshua Williamson, speaking of Superman, I got to put this little plug for Reese and I have been reading Joshua Williamson's Dawn of DC Superman, which is very much a return to classic form for him. So if you're looking for some classic Superman, I do recommend. It's not perfect, but we have. I think I can speak for both of us, Reese. We are enjoying it, and do think he's a solid take. And it's a relatively new series, so I think it's only now on issue like 12-ish or so. So it's pretty good. Jamal Campbell did some of the artwork for some of the early issues, so it's got a very energetic.
Did you ever read The Nail, Alan Davis? This is another nail. Let me see if I can find it. But this is like another nail. This is the sequel to it, but it's I think it's like an Elseworlds kind of thing where it's Superman and the Justice. It all kind of stems down to the Kents getting a flat tire before they ever met Superman. I believe it's been a while since I've read it. But
Yeah, that's what the first one was.
yeah, but it all still felt right. Like I think there's ways that you can like go around stuff and still kind of have the ultimate feel.
Well, and to go back and address Twitlis's discussion or point about the idea of the Ultimate Spider-Man being the Spider-Man for that generation. One of the things that what comes back to me on the other side of the big two, right, is in the Batman comics, you had this variation between these character-driven stories and these, mystery or event-based stories that were kind of going through all of the titles. But that wasn't your entry-level Batman book. Your entry-level Batman book in the 90s was the Batman the Animated Series comic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Batman Adventures, yeah.
Right, Batman Adventures. And every issue of Batman Adventures was in that never space. That never right?
It's a perfect distillation of the character, I think.
Yeah.
It was, but there was a surprising amount of like little continuity because Penguin becomes mayor, and
it's true. Yeah,
there was some ongoing stuff they started to put in there.
There definitely was within that book, but if you didn't pick up on it from issue to issue, you didn't matter, right?
I would say largely. I get what you're saying. Yeah,
and so for me, by that time, I was already a big continuity hound. So I only picked up the Batman Adventures if it was a super fun story, right? Mm-hmm. Like when they introduced Barbara Gordon into the comic, I was just like, I got the first issue with Barbara Gordon in it because like Barbara Gordon's one of my favorites, right? Mm-hmm. And all that kind of stuff. And so, but for the most part, I didn't bother to put my money down on that one because I was reading the other Batman.
Kelsey's looking at his shelf because
I have all the Batman Adventures ever done. I love all that stuff. But yeah, they never. Speaking of Barbara, they never broached into the Oracle and stuff like that. They never got into her being shot by Joker, thanks to the Killing Joke, which should have been just another tale became canon. But I thought it was interesting because, like, if we're talking about moving characters down the way, I really enjoyed that. I'm like, what a major change for a significant character,
and
to undergo,
And I really loved Barbara as Batgirl. But when I got to know Barbara as Oracle, I was like, it was such a development of the character, right? So it was kind of like 12-year-old me liked the idea of Batgirl, right? Mm-hmm. And by the time I was like 15, 16 and really like getting into Oracle stories and like seeing like the complexity and like how this person is like the strength of her character, right? The strength of her person developing into that. Whereas like, I've been through this traumatic thing, but there's not for a second I'm going to let that define my life.
Yeah. I mean, she didn't fight crime just because she was a pretty girl. I mean, there was a more deep-seated passion or drive to do these things that she does.
And so that's one of the things the fact they were able to like salvage the character, but really, give this character a platform to grow in, even if that wasn't the intention going in.
Yeah,
it was a serendipity that I think was really worth it. So that's the thing is like that's part of like I love the idea of characters being able to progress and age and grow and die, but I also see that for a medium, comics need to have certain titles or certain characters or certain frameworks that are evergreen that don't change. That like you don't need to see Charlie Brown go through high school.
Yeah, right.
Grade is plenty.
Don't need to see that. No,
don't need to see Calvin grow up.
I have seen
lose his Hobbs toy. No,
someone did do you. I'll see if I can pull it up. But someone did. It wasn't Hergé, but someone did like old Tintin. And it's like I
wow.
didn't need to see that image. And he's like lost his hairline and everything. And I was like, nope, my innocence didn't need that hit.
Well, and I've seen a few people do like fan arts of like, you know, Calvin grown up and with his wife and his daughter. And I'm like, you know, as a dad whose kids are all grown up now, I'm like, oh man, that really hits me right there.
Yeah,
that's fine, but I don't want to read a book of that.
Yeah.
You know, I'll look at somebody's, you know, Tumblr page or whatever on that, or DeviantArt little comic or whatever, and I'm fine. That's all I'll ever need.
Novel. Yeah. What's your old friend up to these days? Oh,
It loses the charm. It becomes like, you know, Calvin after work.
Although if Bill Watterson was to explore that, where Calvin now has a daughter and she now pals around with Hobbs, who's still the same old plush toy that he had when he was a kid. Maybe Hobbs is a little worn out and he's having trouble keeping up with this little kid. You know, I don't know. I can imagine a lot of fun stories with that as well.
Yeah.
But
I like him to be in my imagination.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
I got all the books. He exists in that time capsule forever for me. You know.
I love how Watterson refused to settle the question. It's one of my favorite things about the whole thing is that, you know, there's a reading where you go, it's clearly just a doll. But Watterson himself said, I want that question to be ambiguous. And he there were little things, there were little details that, you know, made you wonder. And kind of, if you want to believe that Hobbs is 100% not, you know, imaginary, that he's real, you can read it that way. And Watterson lets you do that. And I love that.
Well, he is real. He exists within Calvin and us. I mean, like Horatio Hellpop, aka Nexus, is real to me, you know, in that I've been with this character long enough that I understand his voice as he's written by Mike Barron.
Yep.
And it would be an interesting experiment to see it written by someone else. Which I think it is being written, at least on the Dude's side. Dude is writing his own material. I should read some of that and see if I recognize the voice change, you know, if it's a different internal kind of voice the character has, you know, not like captions, not internal that, but I just mean like his manner of being, I guess. I don't know. And that's really difficult to go from writer to writer. That's definitely, I mean, the X-Men were very good. And Marvel, obviously editorial for years, was very good at keeping things consistent, because I would read, I just read on John's Long Box. He's another YouTuber. He's doing his own comic now. We've been doing a deep dive on Jim Starlin's Warlock run. And that's been a hoot, man, because it's really fascinating, all the stuff in that I had no idea about and how it relates to everything I do know about. But it's fascinating with I look like a giant here. Let me zoom in a little bit. But they got to no, I'm too close. So but I got to the last book, and Spider-Man and the Thing show up, and the Avengers, and it was like running into old pals. I mean, their voice was perfectly what you would expect. You know, Spider-Man was very Spider-Man. He was very Peter Parker, and it was such a joy, because I'm like, here we are with Jim Starlin, who's writing one of the weirdest comics I think I've ever read, filled with ideas that I've seen now stolen from tons of movies and various things, or, you know, not stolen, but made more popular by everything from Star Wars to Back to the Future. And, but then Spider-Man shows up, and it's Spider-Man, you know, it was perfect. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's ways to make it consistent no matter what's happening, just by keeping the voice of the character consistent and the way he reacts to things. You know.
So, a couple things I want to point out from the chat I thought were really cool. We're talking about Back to Spider-Man. and every generation kind of have their own Spider-Man. Jim said, Jim Tuner.
Yeah, that was
said
cool.
90s kids can relate to Spider-Man, Peter Parker who sells his marriage and unborn child to the devil. He raised his aunt from the dead. Screw everybody involved in that decision.
I never read that run, so
I will never be cool with that.
9/11, ladies and gentlemen.
So, yeah, that you're is that got a chapter in your thesis?
it's kind of, yeah. I don't go that far into Spider-Man's deal with the devil specifically, but I have a working theory that 9/11 caused a lot of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It changed a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of those guys that are writing that stuff are New Yorkers as well. So, well, I don't know about Bendis wrote that run, didn't he? So, that was no, it was Bendis, wasn't it? Straczynski.
I think it was just.
Well, at that time, Bendis was still on Ultimate. I don't think he'd made
Brian Michael Straczynski. That's what it was.
There you go. And also, Fly Fox had made the comment about the Spider-Man cartoon being the introduction to the comics, which I think is also pretty accurate. Which is kind of the thing I was going for with the animated series comics.
I mean, I grew up on Spider-Man as Amazing Friends, so early days.
I remember those very well.
Yeah,
well, as well as a 6-year-old remembers things 30, 40 years later.
Remember True Believer.
Wow, I'm old. Jim Tudor says, how would 2000s kids relate to Nexus in the aftermath of Cartoon Network Space Ghost Coast to Coast?
That's a good question, because everything now is postmodernist, deconstructed and made fun of, and you can't forced irony. You can't have just earnestness in a character, especially one dressed like Nexus, but that's kind of what I like about it, is to force people to, if they read it, they might read it as a joke at first. Oh, look how silly this guy is. Let's see him fighting it. And then they get some substance out of it. And
I think one of the things I think Nexus and the Badger too. I mean, any of Mike's creator-owned stuff is that because he's been the primary mover and shaker behind it for all this time, people that are coming to the projects are either coming because they have previous experience with them or by word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot more people know what they're looking for when they're coming to a Nexus project than they would just pulling something off of the shelf. I think that's one of the strengths of the creator-owned model. You don't have other people with divergent viewpoints, mucking about in the aspect of it.
Yeah.
So, like, you go back to that.
Well, speaking of jumping into Nexus, one thing I do want to mention to chat is you can read a huge chunk of Nexus through Amazon Kindle. Oh, that was old Tintin. Which, like I said, now I had to see it. I had to see old disgraced Tintin, and so now you have to as well.
He looks like Phil Collins.
This is true.
Terrible image.
Also, there's no way that dog is still alive.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, you're right.
Sorry, Snowy. You're not immortal.
Snowy too.
Yeah, exactly.
Snowy
at this point. But I was gonna say on Amazon Kindle, you can access a great deal of the omnibus editions of Nexus, and I highly recommend that if you have either Comixology or what's the other one, the Kindle Unlimited. I think you can get it through either of those. And you can read a huge chunk of Nexus material. So like I said, if you have those memberships, you already have access to it. So what are you waiting for? Otherwise, you can, like I said, you can purchase them through those platforms as well, or sign up for them, or buy hard copies. So, encourage our audience to, because it's definitely got a thumbs up of approval from everyone here on the panel, and it'll definitely inform your enjoyment of Nexus Scourge, which it looks like the Indiegogo because you have it listed on a couple of different platforms, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
And
Indiegogo, Fund My Comic, and
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter. So,
Kickstarter,
or
okay.
you can go to baroncomics.com and you can get links to any one you want.
Gotcha.
And I'm pretty sure that the links are all in the description as well. I think I did that when I set the show up last night.
So I just wanted to make sure our audience knows that if you're interested in kind of what you've seen this evening, there are multiple ways, like I said, ongoing campaigns right now to read brand new Nexus stories. But I highly recommend reading the older material, previous material as well.
It's definitely easy to find. There's a ton of it out there. Dark Horse did a huge run. You could still get collections, the omnibus, and like you're saying, you could read it for free, see if it's something you're interested in. To me, it's just, I love sci-fi. I like superheroes, and it's like two great tastes go great together. So, what is it? Can I become your coloring Padawan? I don't know how to teach people stuff. It's more about like I could teach you the how-tos of the my whole way of teaching is like just learn the tools, and then you're off to the races after that. Once you figure out how the coloring that you like when you see it. So once you figure out how to put that on paper, then you can do what you want, and then you start developing your own sense of what you want. I mean, I'm so story driven. Color is just it's like music in a movie. It adds a layer of subtext that you might not be getting out of the dialogue or out of anything else. You can simply turn a scene into nighttime lit by a bug light, and it casts everything in this green, ominous tone, and suddenly that creates a ton of mood in your scene. So, it's about making those choices that are appropriate to what you're trying to do in the story, in character. And you can also use that to belie the situation where it's a happy scene, but there's an undercurrent of animosity the characters have towards each other that's not being represented outwardly. You can show that in color, by giving everything a gray look, maybe, and not so happy. Or you could do a lot. You could do a lot of things in color. I always call it the music of comics. It's this whole other level of subtext that we can use.
I like your way of phrasing that. I think that's because if the panel layout is kind of like the cinematography, then the music is the color. It's a interesting way of.
Yeah, and if it's black and white, you have tones. If it's high contrast, you deal with a lot of heavy shadowing and stuff like that. I mean, it's all these things. To me, like, everything is in service to the story you're trying to tell. And after doing it over and over and over, it's almost like the hardest part is learning how to trust your instinct. Like my instinct when I read a story, I'm immediately like, when I'm reading a novel or something, my mind is racing. It's just like that never-ending story where you go into the story. It's so true. Like, I'm there. I'm like looking around and like seeing it. I mean, I don't really get that from comics because it's visually kind of like interpreted right there. So I like to try to do as much as I can to, again, suspend that disbelief, to make you feel, make it resonate somehow.
The mind's eye is something that I had to train. It's like a muscle, and the fact that I needed to mentally conjure what, like, to think about comics, to think about scripting, even in that type of storytelling, the fact that I needed to envision what characters were doing, where they might be standing, what colors things were. As someone who started off by just passively consuming the media, it was something that I have noticed grow inside of me the more you do it. And like I said, but it's interesting to identify, that's an actual little cerebral muscle. And if you already have it very well developed, you may not notice that it's just so buff and strong. It comes to you so naturally. But for those of us who are much younger at that, it's like, no, you got to flex that thing. You got to take some time, close your eyes, and mentally work on your mind's eye to bring that to life.
I grew up as a rabid consumer of media. Cartoons. When anime started coming around, I got as much as I can get. I read comics and novels and looked at picture books and photographs. I'd go to the library and just check out random books on tugboats, and learn how tugboats work. And I couldn't get enough. And that kind of builds your library in a way, like especially movies. I watched everything, literally everything I've watched. So eventually you get kind of a sixth sense for, how certain moods are portrayed visually through cinema. And comics is kind of similar, but it has its own way of telling these things. And you could break rules that cinema holds, very true. They're not really that essential in comics. So what's this? Actually, give me a ton to think about. Okay, cool. I think what I like about your coloring is that it feels like classic colors with new tools. Thank you. That's definitely a big part of it, because like I think we've crossed the Rubicon, as they say, of coloring, where it's now painted. Like everything is like just a painted comic, and it's almost harder to see everything. And when you look at like an old comic, they'll just do a green color over the whole crowd that's in the background, and the black and white of the art is your greatest values, and that green just kind of blocks it out and drops it into the background, but you could still see everything because it's just the one color. If I was to go in and color every one of those little people, it would just look like mud. You wouldn't be able to see it. So yeah, I'm always trying to kind of pull some of those great things that work so well from the old stuff and just add a little lens flare on top. No, not a lens flare. I hate lens flares. But.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually one of those things too. Like I'm a big fan of the flat colors because it does let the line work sing, but it's also a situation where it allows it's easier on the eye to process the information. So I think it's actually, depending on the line art, it can be more effective at actually communicating what's going on with it.
Oh, the Europeans are brilliant at it. I love looking at the European books because they'll do the flat color, but they're using like colors that we don't have in our box. They're so observant when it comes to light and how light works, and they put that in the form of relatively flat color in a lot of cases, and it's so well done.
That also allows you, when you are one of the things I love about that too is then when you do take one of the small details and add those color notes to it, that actually makes it signals that there's something important that's going on. So you're in ways that, like, if everything is if everybody in a crowd is colored, then everyone looks the same. But if there's only a few people, then those are the things that are going to catch your eye. They're the hints for later. So
would it be fair to say that's also, or not that also, but there's also a I don't know if is the term negative space appropriate to use, where when you have your character maybe fully rendered, but then in the background you're letting the silence speak a little bit more. Even if it's not 100% technically negative space, if you are using maybe just a solid color, there is as opposed to over rendering every single background detail like a film, you're kind of channeling kind of what negative space would do, which is allowing that contrast.
There's a great example in a film that a lot of people missed, but it was a Sam Raimi did a baseball movie called For Love of the Game, I think it's called, with oh man, what's his name from Waterworld?
Kevin Costner?
Yeah, Costner. And he's like an aging pitcher. And there's a great analogy for all artists and sports is how you focus. and there's this moment where he gets on the field and there's people like, and the background just is pushed right to him, the way they shot the lens where it just looks like the people in the stands are right next to him and they're just yelling, "You suck," and it's like, it's overbearing. It's just right on top of him, but he just kind of closes his eyes and he's like, "Clear the mechanism," and the background just blurs and all the sounds become muffled and he's isolated. It's this perfectly sharp rendered character amidst this blurry background. So it's like all background distraction is cut off. So in a color situation, you can think about that. And like, say you're having a character who hears some awful news or something like that, and he feels isolated in that very moment. You can drop out all color from the background. You can even go black and white. You can render it in one color. You could do, and you render him out like normal, and suddenly he's just isolated in this, negative space like you're talking about. So you can there's so many things you could do with color that really will elevate your story and just give it that extra bit of life. And
I'm sold. I'm looking forward to Nexus Scourge.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to your layouts. You had some, I remember from Nora Saga, you had some beautiful layouts. I'm looking, I have
all
my
of those are in
standards
my
high.
scribbles book. So I got all the layouts, and I'm trying to wrap that up, and I'm feeling the pressure right now because I'm getting those questions. Where's that book? Where's that book? And I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not meant to be a publisher. So I think this is my last kind of outing on my own. I like working with other people. I like, letting other people take some of the burden, and I'll share the wealth, so like I got teams of people working with me from here on out to help facilitate. That way I can just focus on working. But anyway, that's a big aside. But yeah, all the layouts for Nexus triplets. I think I even got Scourge minus spoilers. Like, I leave some spoilers and stuff out of it, but 90% of everything I've done that's in layout form from probably the last 10 years is in that book. Mighty Crusaders. That's coming soon. Yeah, I'm a layout fiend, so I love layouts.
Gosh, I still burned in my mind the layout you did for Nora Saga, where it was overhead, over the shoulder shot, looking at a map, narrating the journey they're about to take.
Oh yeah,
that was genius. Because it was exposition, so it did storytelling, and it was a beautiful art piece all at the same time. And that's to me is the chef's kiss, when it's like when it's not just a pretty art, because we've all looked at double page spreads where it's like, oh, that's meant to be an art piece. That's a pinup. But when you're able to do the kind of beautiful double page spread image, and it also is doing like double duty as a really heavy storytelling page, that's the
I love that in stories where at the very beginning you tell the audience what is about to happen, and so it's like, this is what we're doing, but then to get there, it's like I had this conversation with this old guy from New York who was telling me, he's like, right now you think your life is going to go from here to here in a straight line, right? He's like, it's not going to do that. It's you're going to end up there, but it's going to go down here and then back, and then you'll end up there at some point, And I love that. I love you can lay it all out right in front of them. This is what's going to happen. And so many great stories are told that way, where they could tell you, here's everything that's going to happen, and then you read it back and you're like, oh man, they told me everything right at the beginning, actually.
So can we get like a space map for Nexus to go on?
Maybe. Well, that's what that whole scene where they're in the room with the planets and the
all right, all right,
kind of
gotcha.
like that, not really.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, guys, we're at 2 hours, so that's the usual link for the show. We've got the links to Nexus Scourge down in the description. Go check it out. Go if you have the resources to go check out the Nexus Omnibus on Amazon. why not? Why not? It'd be great. Seven at the last minute shows up to say good show. You may have been here. I'm assuming you've been here for a while. If you could tell us that it was good, so it's probably not fair to say that you just showed up.
These last 30 seconds have been
Last
wonderful.
30 seconds.
Yeah.
That's last 3 seconds ever. And if you're not following Ideal Comics, that's my little outing. If you're not following Ideal Comics on Global Comics, you should, because every Sunday a brand new Grabbit the Rabbit superhero strip is coming up, courtesy of my boy Taliesin. So it's been super fun. I think so anyway. But yeah, that's the things. Fly Fox says we should have Kelsey more often.
Yeah, I'll come back. I love talking this deep story stuff, especially about comics and all that. So it's always fun to me.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah,
well,
for sure.
Until next time, get out there and read some more comics. And I think we're doing Superman next week. I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll catch you all later. So, bye.
Adios. I just realized you had